Well, as Paul continues here in talking to Titus about the qualities of spiritual leaders, he kind of goes from this idea of dishonest gain to the other side of the coin, which would be various forms of hospitality. He says, rather than pursuing dishonest gain, in a sense, he says he must pursue being hospitable. Now, the word hospitable here is philoxenos, which is an interesting because a combination word here, a compound word, phileo, love, philo or love of friendship, love of relationship, love of people, and xenos means stranger. And so in much of the world, even today, those two words never fit together. You don't have an affection for a friendship that you show to somebody who is a stranger and you don't know. In fact, in many cultures, stranger is synonymous with danger. And until you begin to understand that that's become so entrenched because of multiple invasions over centuries, you don't understand the fear that people have. In fact, I would say that Russia and Ukraine are countries like that it's hard for us to understand how insecure those countries feel about their borders until you study their history and you realize that they have been subjected to multiple invasions throughout history. And so strangers often became equivalent with danger. And yet he says, rather than seeing strangers automatically as dangerous, we need to all be willing to show them hospitality. We need to be able to be kind and generous to them. Now, that doesn't mean that we simply leave our doors unlocked and walk down dangerous alleyways, because there are some places we can go that we ultimately know will be unhealthy and dangerous for us. But it's the idea that we don't become cliquish or clannish. But instead, there's kind of a balance that we have in our life towards people. There's an openness, an open-handedness towards other people, and not just simply having a clenched fist in our relational dynamics. And this is one of those kind of things when Proverbs says, if you want to have friends, you have to show yourself friendly. People who are unfriendly are generally people who have been hurt in friendships or in relationships. And as the world becomes more given to selfishness, as our culture is, that we find that oftentimes familiar relationships or friendly relationships can turn to become very adverse. I remember having people who have been, basically blocked and canceled by their friends that they once interacted with because they had a different view on the political environment or who they should vote for. And even, people going so far, I would never be friends with friends with someone who votes for Donald Trump. And you think about that, that's a crazy way to go through life, that you see a Trump sticker and you automatically hate that person, or you see a Biden sticker and you begin to question their sanity. It's really interesting because a lot of times there's more to people behind the labels than we understand. But we have become such a divided and conflicted culture that we aren't approaching people with saying, let them prove that they're not safe before I conclude that by outward appearance they're not safe. And this really creates a lack of ability to really have an interaction. And especially if you have a concern about reaching lost people, you have to kind of take a look at what are the assumptions that you make about people. In particular, I think about people who are in the LGBT community. It's for many Christians, it's like they've got leprosy and it's contagious. And they actually feel comfortable by being hateful towards them. I speak out against those lifestyles because they're anti-biblical, but I don't hate those people. In fact, if I get angry at all, I get angry at people who tell them that it's okay or right or good to be in that lifestyle, because the lifestyle itself is destructive. So it's important we understand the basis and think through how we approach these kind of issues, because Paul very clearly says that people who engage in that lifestyle are going to destroy themselves and are going to eventually end up in eternal separation from God. So my desire is to see them come to Christ. So I try to treat those people on a one-on-one basis with as much respect as I possibly can, but I'm not going to lie to them and tell them it's okay or that God loves them just the way they are. I mean, that's a half-truth. When we say God loves you just the way they are, I think the other side of that, he loves you so much that he doesn't want to leave you the way you are. He wants to change you. He wants to transform you. He wants you to be born again. He wants you to walk with him. And you can't do that if you continue in this lifestyle. So this is where I find that many Christians seem to be very unclear on how we should approach these things. That's why, one of the things that Paul said in Galatians, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. All people. Do you think that Paul didn't have to deal with people who were LGBTQ and whatever other consonant or letter there in their name? I mean, he had to deal with all of that. These cities were filled with this kind of stuff. Homosexuality and transsexuality were widespread and in many ways allowed and even condoned in the Greco-Roman world of his time. So that when Paul went to Corinth, he had to pass through the port city of Cenchrea, and I guarantee you there were prostitutes of every kind that were waiting for the sailors who were coming off the ships. And so as a result, Paul had to walk through the middle of that, and that's why he wrote to the Corinthians, and he talked about these lifestyles, and he says, such were some of you, at least until you came to Christ and you were born again. And so we have to understand that it's not the hatred of the individual, but it is a hatred of the sin that is going to destroy them. And that used to be such a clear statement. I hate the sin, but I love the sinner. Somehow now we're not supposed to say that because we're told that's hypocritical. And I would just simply say that is absolutely correct. That's a proper definition, that we should hate the sin because of what sin does. You see, sin, we have to understand, is a toxin. It's a poison. And the same way that if you would take rat poison and start eating it, I can guarantee you it's going to kill you. It may not kill you immediately, but as you continue to eat, it's just a matter of time. And the more you eat, the faster you're going to die. And that's the same thing is true. And when Solomon said, don't be overmuch wicked lest you perish before your time, he said in Ecclesiastes, that when he said that, he was just saying the more you indulge in sinful behavior, the greater toll it's going to take on your body and on your mind and ultimately your soul itself. So he said that God would bring you to a quick conclusion. It's not so much that God says, I'm going to kill you if you do these things, but there is a law of natural consequences. And again, when we understand that sin is toxic to our well-being, not only physically and emotionally and even spiritually, and that the only healing is to be healed spiritually so that it might bring wholeness into our mental state. And that as a result, hopefully, we can restore ourselves physically. That God works from the inside out, the world, sin destroys from the outside in. And so it's important for us to realize that when we see these people engaging in these lifestyles, they are basically drinking in toxins that are going to lead to their demise, maybe even eternally and spiritually. And if that doesn't cause us to weep and be sorrowful, then we've got it all wrong. We're missing the point completely. We're failing to really apprehend and appreciate what's really going on and failing to care the way we should. So that sometimes we can become the frozen chosen, that we've so isolated ourselves from the world. And this is my concern oftentimes with the church and oftentimes with even our Christian education. I understand why parents want to pull their kids out of the culture because the schools have become very dangerous places for many kids. There are a lot of bad influences there. But at the same time, how are we going to engage the culture? And if we're not teaching our kids how to address the culture and to challenge these ideas, if we just want them to be ignorant that these kind of things are going on. And now that makes sense if we're talking about age appropriateness and so forth, which means you can't watch a lot of Disney stuff anymore. But at the same time, there comes a point where as young people, they need to understand why this is the case. I remember when I was doing youth ministry, I started talking about all of these kinds of things. I talked about sexual immorality. I talked about homosexuality. I addressed these things and really kind of laid out to the kids why this is important. And it was crazy because the kids started coming in droves because they wanted to hear it. Their classmates wanted to hear it. And so we had all these non-Christian kids that were showing up because they wanted to hear what the Bible said about this stuff. Because they weren't hearing it from their parents, their churches weren't addressing it, and the culture certainly wasn't addressing it, and the schools were pushing it. And I think that it made a difference in a lot of kids' lives because we were able to present a reasonable explanation of why these things are not good. And so I hope as a Christian, you'll prayerfully look at that. And as you encounter these people, I pray you encounter them with a heart of love and compassion and sympathy, but also that as they find you as to be a loving and kind person, that you also be a person who will tell them the truth, that you won't lie to them until it's okay. That in reality, you can say whatever you want to say, but at the end of the day, there are only two genders. There's only male and female. That's biology. As one angry person said to me, that you need to get an education. And my response was, you mean like biology? Because that's what we're really talking about here is biology. And we just need to be able to think these things through clearly and be able to talk about them directly. And I hope this helps a bit. Anyway, God bless you. We'll wrap this up tomorrow. Go in His grace.